Hi, thanks for that introduction. And I really want to thank Brian for the invitation to come back to Ann Arbor and participate in the celebration of the 10-year anniversary of the department. It's quite an honor, and it's been a real pleasure of just walking around and seeing our old neighborhoods. This is a little bit unusual for me. I usually give technical talks, but today I want to step back a little bit and take some stock and share a little bit more about my journey, and in particular, in my background and how I got here. But I also want to highlight how this department really nurtured my interests coming in and developed the skills that have been really critical for my career. Let's see. So I don't want to get yelled at by Brian. I don't know if you see him up here, like police in the time. So I think I'm just going to skip this. This was going to be my in a nutshell, but I'm going to dig into the details anyhow. So for the sake of time, I'm going to move on from the overview and actually take you back, if you can imagine, a little more than 10 years ago, the version of me at Case Western Reserve University in Cleveland. Before I came to the University of Michigan, I was a young economics major. And I was always really interested in quantitative ways to describe human behavior. And in particular, I was interested in this field of behavioral economics, which combines psychology with economics and really seeks to explain why it is that weird humans tend to act really differently in reality than what we would expect using classical models. And if you know anything also about Case Western, it might not come as a huge surprise that at the time I was also really interested in computers. And I included this relic here for those of you too young to remember what life was like before you could carry computers around in your pocket and in your backpack. They used to be pretty stationary, and this is actually a pretty sleek one in comparison to how they sometimes looked. So this is pretty early internet days, but I was already kind of developing this interest in using the internet and computer technology to ask research questions and to collect and analyze data. And so I spent a lot of time in my senior year doing my honors thesis in scraping data from eBay and doing online surveys, building those because it was very actually kind of difficult to do at the time, to explore differences in risk perception and risk aversion across genders. And so very interested in this area. And actually, economics was my launching off point in my introduction to biology, and specifically through the study of game theory, where I was introduced to this book, Evolution in the Theory of Games. And this was my gateway into ecology, into evolutionary biology. And as soon as I realized that I could use and translate what I had been learning, the models and the quantitative approaches that I had been learning in economics, and then apply those to this, for me, kind of new field in biology, I was really hooked on that. And I quickly added this evolutionary biology degree to my studies. And then I had the really good fortune between the summer between my junior and senior years of getting an internship at the National Institutes of Health in the Division of Computational Biosciences. And that was my first exposure to machine learning, which looks really different than it does now. But that's what really cemented for me that this was the area that I wanted to be at, this intersection of quantitative sciences and statistics, machine learning, computer sciences, and then most importantly, the biological sciences. And so I continued and extended my love of research here at Michigan, first in the biostatistics department, like Margaret said, and then in the bioinformatics program. And as a member of the Brandt Lab, I was exposed to a lot of different data sets and research projects that were being led by investigators who were using his metabolomics core lab. And doing analysis on that wide variety of topics and research projects gave me just this incredible quantitative foundation, which was really the basis of my career, especially early in my career when I was doing a lot of technical work still. I got a lot of really good practice in developing efficient analysis workflows and making compelling visualizations that tell stories with data, in presenting results, and overall just learning how to be an effective collaborator on other people's research. And those things are still skills and techniques that I use every day in my work. And then in my thesis work, kind of like what I was doing in my thesis work at Case, I again took inspiration from the high-scale algorithms and approaches that were powering the web at the time, things like Google's PageRank. But instead of mining hyperlinks or social networks, I was applying these algorithms and these approaches to metabolic networks and mining those for structural properties that I could correlate with physiological function. I even used those network properties to explore evolutionary relationships and proposed a metabolism-centric way of measuring organism similarity. Somehow remembered that. So after graduating then with my PhD in bioinformatics, I moved out to Seattle, Washington, and I did what all young, aspiring bioinformaticians do, which is immediately get a data science job in fashion retail. Thanks for that. So I started my career as a data scientist in the Nordstrom Data Lab, and we called it a lab, so it's legit. This was a period of really enormous growth for me, and it was actually a really ideal place for me to start my career. Data Lab was kind of a special team. It was this interdisciplinary group that was split between these super experienced, really seasoned software engineers, and then these somewhat less seasoned, less experienced data scientists like myself. And this is really the team where I cut my teeth and I learned how to write and ship code that millions of customers on Nordstrom.com could actually rely on working. And this is where I grew my ability to work collaboratively on a team and appreciate and grow my depth and tools to help me work on joint code bases and have higher standards of practice. And my specialization was recommendation algorithms and personalization. So thematically, again, I found myself working with behavioral data from the web, behavioral and preference data. And so at the time that I was learning a lot about engineering, I was actually showing off a lot of the scientific skill set that I developed here in this bioinformatics department, including obviously the visualization skills of a highly seasoned phylogeneticist, I think. One of the projects that I'm the most proud of is actually what some of these images I was able to dig up are from. And it involved creating an outfit builder that required a lot of creativity and quantitative reasoning and actually empiricism. So our goal here was to create a really compelling recommender to help people build and style outfits based on an initial seed product. So maybe a shirt or a pair of pants that they've already selected. So color is obviously a really critical piece of styling. And we had a ton of really granular data about garment colors from these photos from the catalog. But the question was, how do we teach algorithms to reason about colors and to make stylistic and realistic choices? Well, one approach you might imagine is just use color theory. So we know quite a lot about primary colors, secondary colors, but it turned out that that purely kind of theoretical approach didn't produce really realistic styles like you and I would pick out, or some of us would pick out for ourselves. So instead of a color theory approach, I took an empirical approach to this problem. I realized, look, we have all of these actually amazing domain experts called fashion designers who make these really good decisions about how to combine colors all the time. So why don't we just learn from them and then feed that to the algorithms? So when something like this, we mined every product in our catalog to derive what we called complementary color sets by extracting all of the colors that appear together in the same garment. So you can kind of see that example from that dress up there. You've got 4 kind of colors, those 2 shades of blue and a black and a gray, and together those work together to create the pattern that you see. Then we looked across all of those sets and we quantified the frequency at which those colors co-occurred within garments. And then to make recommendations, all we had to do was apply some simple logic like match this with a contrasting color from the set of commonly co-occurring colors. And we could find contrasting colors. You know, how do you explain what a contrasting color is then to an algorithm? You can do that by using things like distances in the RGB color space, very similarly to how you might navigate evolutionary distances in bioinformatics. So this is a great example of me taking a lot of the approaches that I was using and applying them to a super different setting than where I had learned them. This approach, sort of empirical approach, led to a lot more realistic styles and also meant that our algorithms evolved over time as the data continued to update the models. they reflected seasonal styles and trends, which was a little bit of a benefit that we really hadn't anticipated initially. And so we were teaching them to think the way that our designers think. Okay. Okay. see. Okay, let's talk about where I am now, though. So this is just a short transition slide, really to help make the conceptual link. So coming from a really different area back into where I am now as a leader of the data science and data engineering organization at Ginkgo Bioworks, a synthetic biology company. You might think, wow, that seems really different. Well, the reality is it's not all that different. And actually, a big piece of what we do in this space is also create recommendations. So conceptually, what all you're doing there is taking a big search base and trying to compose it down to relevant results. And that's actually one of the first things that I did at Zymergen, very related to now what I do at Ginkgo Bioworks, which is where I am now. So today I lead the data organization there at Ginkgo, which is the leading synthetic biology platform. Synthetic biology, in my view, is the ultimate industry for people like us who have sort of an engineering mindset and who love working across disciplines. And it combines the latest technologies in genome editing, robotic automation, high throughput screening, machine learning, and data science. It brings them together in what we call biofoundries that engineer cells to make materials and molecules for a range of applications. So at Ginkgo, we work with customers in agriculture, flavors and fragrances, food science, waste remediation, and even in the production of cannabinoids. So this practice of synthetic biology is really organized around the design, build, and test, or DBTL cycle. I'm curious, is anybody, you guys familiar with this concept, the DBTL cycle? Okay, Brian is. Well, this is something if you are in this space, you'll definitely learn like the back of your hand. The DBTL cycle is really for rapid experimentation and iteration to an engineered cell that performs to a predefined specification. So usually some combination of yield and productivity of a molecule of interest. So in the design phase, we're using computational methods to identify targets for genetic engineering, and sometimes using those also to optimize sequence. So those might be through mechanistic techniques that maybe you've used, like flux balance analysis, or those can be kind of black box models from machine learning, or they can be combinations of those powerful approaches. In the build phase is where we're actually building the genetic constructs and transforming the cells so that they express the new engineered inserts. And then in the test phase, we screen the candidates at high throughput and we generate large volumes of data that describe the performance of those cells and making the products of interest. Incidentally, as a statistician, this is one of my favorite parts because this is where a lot of the classical techniques really come to the fore. So a big emphasis on design of experiment, on hypothesis testing, on things like normalization to try to mitigate batch and process effects from the measurement data. And then the learn step is all about synthesis and synthesizing the results from those multiple rounds of experimentation and screening to inform the next design step, but then also to bring up the level of abstraction to another level, to another layer, so that we can learn about biological properties that we can actually move into a different context, move into maybe a different host cell or a different target molecule, and basically teach ourselves to be better engineers of biology. So that's me in a nutshell. Before Brian kills me, he wanted me to talk a little bit about the modern workplace and what's changing for us and what's important about the skills of today to be successful. And it's undeniable, obviously, that the pandemic has changed a ton about the way that we live and work, and we couldn't have anticipated that 10 years ago. But I'm happy to say that this department really prepared me for that rapid evolution. And first and foremost, if you took anything from my career journey, I hope it's the realization that, like this department and the people in it and the programs, modern problems are super interdisciplinary. No matter whether you're in fashion retail or you're in synthetic biology, you're going to be tasked with these really thorny problems to solve. And sometimes those are very high scale problems, internet scale problems. And your ability to successfully find solutions is really going to hinge on how much exposure you've had to different ways of thinking and solving problems, and then your ability to pluck them out of one context and translate them to where you are, to the problem that you're facing. The other big thing for me, is synthesis of information from all kinds of heterogeneous sources. So when I think about the types of things my team does and the data they're using, like thinking about a process like normalization, trying to eliminate batch effects. That might include data from like operations data from liquid handlers. How long was this plate sitting on the platform before it was actually assayed? And then you have the measurement values themselves coming from the assay. And then you might also fold in bioinformatic context that actually describes what those engineering, what was the goal? What was the biological context around what you were engineering that we can actually use to translate what we discover to other settings and become better biological engineers. So it's really about knowing as many disciplines, knowing the thinking of disciplines as you can, and then synthesizing disparate information. How am I doing, Brian? Okay. Good. So the other piece of this is, of course, a lot of us are purely computational scientists. I know that I am, and so maybe the most obvious change in the modern workplace is the move to remote work. I led a distributed team actually prior to the pandemic at Zymergen, and so that prepared me really well, I think, for leading a remote and distributed team again at Ginkgo. And to me, I get asked this a lot. What are the keys to success in this space? And I actually don't think it's that special, or it's not that different from the keys to success without remote work. To me, it really comes down to outcomes and expectations. So outcomes, it's all about being intentional in what you're trying to get out of every interaction, or even with your work. How do you know when it's done? What's the level of performance that's required to solve this application, ship it, and move on to the next thing? Be intentional and know that before you start. Similarly for communications, what do I want to learn from this interaction? What do I want, and for leaders, what do I want my team to come away understanding after this discussion? And knowing that going in seems obvious, but it's a skill that I think we have to get better at. Likewise, expectation setting is really important. We're working across different time zones. It's I think more important than ever to be super communicative and transparent about the settings that make you successful or not successful. How do you want to work? When are you going to be working? When are you not working? And being explicit about those boundaries, I think, are really critical for this crazy era that we're in. And then finally, the most important thing I think is having great advocates in your corner. I feel really fortunate to have always had Brian and Chuck in my corner through grad school, and then that has continued for me throughout my career. So again, thank you both for being there for me and for inviting me.